Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of Coach's Corner on the Auburn Undercover podcast. My name is Nathan King. As always, former Auburn DC Ellis Johnson, our publisher Ronnie Sanders, with us as well. And Ellis, like we've been talking about on this show for weeks, we felt like Auburn, if they went and played a clean game and played like they had the last several weeks, they were going to jump up and get somebody at some point. The Kentucky game felt like a winnable one, felt like a winnable matchup. And they went out there and did it. They finally broke their losing streak. First victory against a Power 4 team this season. And, Ellis, for a team that technically can still make a bowl game and is in need of some momentum coming back home in November. I know we were talking before we got rolling. Kentucky's not a very good team this season, but it was certainly the right time for Auburn to finally get the monkey off of its back and win an SEC game.
Yeah, I don't know if you could say they were deserving, but the way they've lost some of these games has just been so frustrating. So the way they took it to Kentucky, and I mean, if you win an SEC road game, that's a good win. And Kentucky usually is a good, solid defensive team, and they just, the rushing game especially, but boy, they cruise right through them. And I think the most important thing is the way they closed, because that's what's been biting them. So hopefully they get a lot of confidence from this. They should have been confident already, because we get on there every week and we say they've got 3/4 of their plays are really good football, and then they make those critical mistakes. It didn't do it this time, so that's a really good win. And they got to go to Vanderbilt this week and on the road again, and Vanderbilt's a problem for everybody this year. And not to get too far off the thing, but Vanderbilt had Texas, they were getting beat soundly, but it ends up coming down to an onside kick. So they're dangerous, and then Auburn will have to play good again. I think they can go up there and get a win. Then they got an open date, and I think they got Monroe, and then they got to find a win with Texas A&M and Alabama somehow. So they still got a really hard job, but this was a good win.
Well, the Vandy game's actually in Auburn this week, right, Nathan?
Oh, they're at home?
They're at home.
Yeah, as much as I'd like to go to Nashville, yes.
Good. Well, that'll help a little bit. Certainly.
Yes. But what do you think this team's chances of making a bowl game are?
I'd say below 50-50, and if they can play like they did at Kentucky, maybe it's 50-50 or a little better. But I mean, to get to a bowl game, they got to either beat Texas A&M or Alabama. And Texas A&M is the hottest team in the league right now. I think they won. I think they've got some problems that they were able to overcome at quarterback position, but to try to beat them back to back, they got to at least win one of them, or they can't get 5. They can't get 6 wins.
Do you think, for the first time, and I mean you've watched these teams play, and you've been doing this a long time, Auburn hasn't been competitive in Tuscaloosa in quite a while. Can that change this year?
Well, one of their biggest wins, I think, and Cam had the big comeback. That was in Tuscaloosa, wasn't it?
It was.
It was, and we had to play them the next week in the championship game. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough because you just the big thing playing on the road in the SEC is noise, and you have to handle it, and it can be a really, really huge challenge. Sometimes it restricts your ability to change plays. Sometimes it causes a bunch of pre-snap penalties. It's just not intimidating, because these kids play like in situations like that all the time, but it's the noise. As a defensive coach, hell, it never bothered us because it was always quiet on the road. But even when we were at home and noise was on our side, but when we were on the field in defense, we got the noise. And so communication for us was sometimes hard. So that's the big thing. But beating Texas A&M at home, beat Vanderbilt at home, and hell, Auburn's best football they've been on the road this year. So I don't know if that's a big enough factor for them or not, but they got a tall order still.
How big would you go ahead?
Sorry, go ahead, Ronnie.
Well, I was just going to say, how big would a bowl game be for this team after the way they started the season and Freeze's, the way the first season finished last year? I mean, seems like making the bowl game, especially after the start, would be a pretty solid accomplishment.
I think it's important, but I do think if he holds his recruiting class together, I don't think it makes that much difference. My opinion, the playoffs have really downgraded the bowls. People don't watch the bowls. Too many kids opt out of the bowls. Uh, you just get some of the most weird performances with players missing, and you don't know what you're going to have show up. You don't know how hard they're going to play. So I don't know. I think it's obviously better to go to the bowl than not go to the bowl. But hell, we used to love to go because we got extra practice with our young kids. Well, now you're going to get your next year's team out of the portal. You're not working young kids. You're not developing anybody. Half the ones you're developing are going to jump in the portal and leave. So you might be developing them for another team. I think it's important, but I don't think it has nearly the significance that it used to.
When you look at a performance like Jarquez Hunter had on Saturday against Kentucky, 278 yards. It's the fourth best game by an Auburn running back ever, period. How much easier does that make it for the defensive side of the ball? Because Auburn has had we've talked about it on here before. DJ Durkin's done a good job with this group this season. They had another good game against a bad Kentucky offense on Saturday. If they can keep that going and try to run the ball effectively in this last month of the season, how much does that kind of help the rest of the coaching staff and the rest of the players kind of open things up on both sides of the ball?
It definitely helps in the aspect that you're talking about. I think they had 10 more minutes of possession than Kentucky did, and that's beating Kentucky at Kentucky football. Because what his MO has been, take care of the ball, play good defense, time of possession, no penalties, turnovers, all that good stuff. And I think Auburn was +1 in the turnovers and 10 minutes in possession, and the running game certainly helps do that. You could do it with a passing game, but not likely. And you had too much clock chopping with a passing game. So they kind of beat Kentucky at Kentucky football, which is what the last three people have done. And I think it also helps the quarterback, Peyton Thorne, obviously. I mean, you get a back going for 200 yards, and the quarterback has to make about half as many critical plays in the game as he would have had to make. And so that takes away those chances for him to throw a dangerous interception or take a sack and get him out of field goal range. So it really is a formula that Auburn needs. They don't have a scrambling, great quarterback that can extend plays and run for 60 yards a game and all that. But he's a really good player if he doesn't have to make too many critical throws. So I think it was probably the biggest key of the game, that and possession time.
Ellis, talking about, you spend a lot of time in the SEC. I think I read the other day where Mark Stoops is now the dean of the SEC coaches. Excuse me.
Wow.
He's been at Kentucky 12 years. That's a pretty long shelf life for an SEC coach, isn't it?
It is. And especially in today's world where, I think they're all making more money and there's less patience. And, what he's done may not be acceptable at another school, but at Kentucky, if you're winning and going to bowl games, and every 3 or 4 years you're pushing people up there at the top of the conference, normally they're going to keep you. And, it's of course a basketball arena and all that. But I think he's done a great job. This year, they don't have this extremely strong running game that he likes. The quarterback is a good player, but he's not extremely mobile, and they're having a hard time protecting him consistently. He proved that the program's not falling apart. I mean, they beat Ole Miss, and that was a big win at the time. Ole Miss was a really good football team at that time. I think they exposed some of Ole Miss's weaknesses, frankly, and it's hurt Ole Miss down the stretch.
Well, and they also had lost to Georgia by 1 point.
Yeah, and those were back to back. I mean, they were playing good football. The South Carolina game, I don't want to use the word fluke, but I think maybe they weren't prepared for South Carolina. And those edge guys just destroyed Vanderbilt. They didn't have a plan to move him out of the pocket and do something to get away from the pass pressure, and it just ballooned on them. They get one score on offense. I mean, on defense, one score to Carolina's offense and got beat 20-something points. So it was just a bad game coming in without a plan to protect that quarterback somehow if you couldn't protect him in the pocket. But I mean, I think Stoops has done a great job there, and he might have had his chances to leave. You know, when he got really going, he chose to stay. Maybe they recognize that and have rewarded him for it. But they've got a little more patience with football up there, and we know that. I was on 2 weeks ago. Alabama was 4-2, and raising hell. You know, people about to get bricks thrown through the windows. And I was on a talk show in Columbia, South Carolina, and then they said Oklahoma, who's not going to win another SEC game, and they're all like they're going to play for the national championship next year, and they've already lost 3 games. So it kind of, expectations can be a little different in different places, but I still think he's done a great job at Kentucky.
Well, I'd have to agree with you. I also think, while we're talking about the conference, I don't think, I think Kalen DeBoer is a really good football coach, and I think he's probably got a pretty good staff. But the conversations that I have with people around that program and around the conference are that it just doesn't fit. And we've been there, and we've seen that, not just at Auburn, not just Alabama, at Auburn and around the conference. I mean, it doesn't look like to me long term it works, but we'll see. I mean, what are your grades for Auburn and Alabama so far this season?
I see a lot of the same things, but I also see them having one of the top recruiting classes in the country. And I hate to keep going back to recruiting, but we know, I mean, it's a professional football league now, being run by our colleges and universities in Disney. And if you got the players, you have to be a bad coach to lose games. So it's a change in philosophy or culture or something. I do see that. And for about 3 or 4 weeks in a row, this was not a team that stays focused in the game, play to play to play, quarter to quarter, etc. They screw things up when they get ahead because they're not focused. They let things snowball when they get behind. And there are too many good athletes out there for that to be happening. But if you watch it, and sometimes, we can all kind of, jump to conclusions and have our own view of things. But one thing Alabama was, even when they were having problem winning or winning close, is they always seemed to be in control of themselves. There weren't a lot of stupid after the Pele penalties, pre-snap penalties. I mean, they had their days, but overall, they were usually a disciplined team. And they'd usually beat you in the turnover ratio. And they still had great athletes, so they were explosive. But all of a sudden, the things I saw on film this year, there's too much, getting personal foul penalties on a key drive, killing the drive, uh, busting coverages, things of that nature. I just, it just looks like there's not the same culture. And I'm not saying they're trying to be. I think DeBoer's going to be his own guy, and I don't blame him. But he's got to be who he is. But as that team changes, I guess the biggest thing will probably help him is this portal thing, because it won't take him 3 or 4 years. It'll take him just one season of this. And when those kids come back, they'll understand what he's like and what he will put up with. And I got a feeling it's not as tight of an atmosphere around that office and around on the practice field and stuff. And that's not necessarily bad. It's just different. And so if it's different, then it takes a while to get those kids on the same page. I mean, you can play with emotion and all that without doing stupid things. But if a kid all of a sudden thinks, you're going to let him out of the house till midnight instead of 10 p.m., and he makes stupid decisions, around 11 p.m. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I don't know if I can explain it or not, but I agree with what you're seeing, but they're still one of the most talented teams in the country. And as long as they recruit that way, he's going to win. And as long as he wins, they ain't going to bother him. If they lose 2 games finishing out the season, and it could happen. I mean, they got to go to LSU. And I don't care what, I just talked about the Carolina Clemson game the same way. I don't give a damn where Alabama and Auburn are. When that game starts, it's a coin toss. And the better team better get it straight in the first 15 to 20 minutes. It'll stay a coin toss. So they got a lot of work to do. If he loses 4, then it'll really get cranked up. Some of it's a little bit quieter right now, but a lot of folks cannot get that Vanderbilt out of their mind.
Well, and I don't think there's, and we may or may not, maybe we're saying the same things. To me, it looks like that, yeah, there's some things that are different. They don't look as disciplined on the field. They got stupid penalties and personal foul penalties and that sort of thing. But I honestly don't think it has anything to do with his ability to coach and recruit. I think he's probably a pretty good coach, and I think he's probably a pretty good recruiter. But you know as well as I do, living here in this environment, and when you start losing 3 and 4 games and you're going through a culture change, these people down here don't care about your culture change. They expect to win,
no doubt.
Every year.
But even when Nick was winning, say 10 years ago, and they were having a hard time scoring points the way a lot of folks were. And there were a lot of people around that program. Hey, we got guys in the dark ages now. This win the kicking game, no turnovers, be more disciplined, and then they beat people 28 to 20 at the end of the game. And everybody else is putting up 45 and 50 over at A&M and some other places, and people were complaining. So what does he do? He brings in Kiffin and Sark and some of those type guys, and he lets them change the offense. And when the offense changed, they still had some years where they were dominant on defense, but the offense wasn't playing complementary to the defense anymore. And the kicking game, wasn't tailored to the defense, which it had been through his philosophy. And so it changed a little bit statistically on the defensive side. Well, that's going to happen. But they got through it, and I think he realized you're not going to win a lot of football games at the championship level. You're not going to win a lot of football games anymore the way the rules are and the type of athletes that are out on that field. You got to score 30-plus points at least to be in a game if you're playing against championship teams. And I think he finally understood that. So, and he finally understood he wasn't going to out-coach people every week. He was going to have to out-recruit them, and he began to do that too. So I don't know. I think so far it's been what a lot of people were afraid was going to happen. And I don't think it's the Tennessee game, that's got them all lit up. It's letting the thing get away at against Vanderbilt. And then they got beat. They didn't give it away. They got beat. And people were like, hell, this can't happen. But it did happen. It's going to be, the only way you erase that and get it out of those people's mind, you better win an ACC championship and get in the playoffs and go play in the national championship game soon, real soon. Or you're exactly right. It'll never. And once they get to where they're never going to accept it, it'll be hard to ever flip it back.
That's right.
If they lose the 3rd game this year, which is very possible, it's going to be hard for him to get it back with his own fan base.
Well, and we've talked about this before. I experienced the same thing at Florida. We replaced Spurrier, and you come in and his words, not ours, were I left the cupboard a little bit bare. That was an understatement to say the least. But and I think Alabama has pretty good players. But the reality is, it didn't matter if we'd won 10 games. I'm still not sure it'd been enough. And certainly going 8-4, 7-5, whatever we went the first year. We never had a chance to recover.
One thing when if you replace a guy like him, and not only was he winning football games, but they loved the style of play. Mm-hmm. They liked the explosive plays, and that's when you don't want to play that style and you change it, it has to work. Or everybody says you changed everything that was good. Doesn't mean it's the wrong way, but you're trying to do it a different way. We liked it the way it was. And there's going to be some of that at Alabama, just like y'all ran into down there. How do you quiet it down? You better be successful, and you don't have 3-4 years to do it.
No. Not
now let's talking about this. Talking about this Vanderbilt team, like you just mentioned, the one that went out and Alabama wasn't perfect that game, but Vanderbilt made the plays they needed to make, especially at the end of the game. I mean, they went out and won the game. It's all come down to the quarterback for them. I thought Hugh Freeze put it well yesterday. He said they pretty much play like Navy. They try to control the ball. They try to take advantage of inopportune defenses. When you're looking at a player like this, where Pavia, the quarterback, I mean, he's beaten Freeze in each of the last 2 seasons at New Mexico State, and he's beaten him pretty handily, including that loss at Auburn last year. When you're a defensive coach, I mean, do you try to tap in? I mean, when you were coach, I mean, do you try to tap in at all to the motivation side of things? A guy that beat you up on your home field last year, or do you just let the film, try to do the talking for this season?
I think, that's a great point you bring up. I remember they had one upset win, but I didn't know they'd lost to them 2 in a row. And they, not only is that quarterback, they took the coordinator and some coaches. Frankly, I think that gives Auburn at least a little bit of an advantage in preparation this week, because it's like we've played these guys 2 years in a row. Well, you didn't play Vanderbilt all those times, but you play in this system. So I think it ought to help him a little bit. He's a really good player, but he's got some good players around him. They're role players, but he's got some good players around him. Texas got too much pressure on him, and they weren't able to really get the running game going. But when I've watched them, the thing that's so hard about you say, why don't they just get after Pavia? If they do that, the rest of it's dead. Well, they got a system where they got an answer for that. If you want to try to blitz him in pass situation, they got some really unusual calls that will blister your rear end. And if you want to try to take him out of the running game, they got some schemes and some reads and all that. It is a well-coached system, and it's a team deal. It's not something based on a guy that can throw 3 60-yard bombs a game and a guy that can run the ball 40 times a game. It's based on a system, really. And the reason he's so good, he's played in that system, and he knew the system when he came in the door with his coach. He didn't have to take 2 seasons to get it ironed out. And it's hard. It's different. When when Alabama got beat by him, I was on the radio with one of the guys, and I mean, all he could talk about was how Alabama got schooled in coaching or something like that, and I kept saying, well, I mean, you can say what you want to say. I just think they executed better. But it is a really good system. And what he does a lot of times, not to get too far into it, but he can switch formations and change up formations without substituting. So you can't make calls to take advantage of who they got on the field. And I noticed 2 plays back to back. One, they showed up in a trips formation, shotgun, and 4 split off the box. And the next play, they're in a formation with 4 backs in the backfield and two wideouts. I mean, 1 tight end and a wideout. And that really makes it hard because you get personnel out there. It's got to be adjusted to all that stuff. And what they're running is some sort of a load option off of it, like a Navy type thing or an Army. And you better have all your assignments down, or it's a 30-yard run with just an above average player. It's hard now. It's a really good system, and the kid runs it well because he's been doing it now in his 4th year. But they'll be prepared for it. You just got to stop it. And Auburn's played good defense all year. They just had 2 or 3 plays a game, where they've had a bad play that's allowed the game to get away from them.
What's your prediction?
I think Auburn will go up there and win a close game. I keep saying they played on the road. I think Auburn will beat them in a very close game. But they're going to have to do what they did last week. If they have that same personality about making a dumb play in the 4th quarter, Vanderbilt will win. That's how they've been beating people.
Let's jump around the conference a little bit. Georgia, Florida.
Florida's really playing better and
Yeah.
had a couple of good games here lately, but I just don't think they can beat Georgia.
Arkansas, Ole Miss.
I would have said Arkansas got a good chance a couple of weeks ago, but they're starting right now. They seem like they're sputtering a little bit on offense, and defensively, they had been really solid and making some key plays every game. I just have to favor Ole Miss right now.
I would assume that Oklahoma can handle Maine, even though they're both 4-4.
Maybe.
Yeah, Maine's pretty bad.
UMass and Mississippi State, although UMass has a better record than Mississippi State.
They're,
Texas,
they're not they're not good either. I've seen a little piece of one of their games. They're really struggling.
and then Texas A&M and South Carolina.
I think that's going to be probably the key game of the week. South Carolina has no chance getting back into the playoff picture. I mean, the SEC playoff picture, or getting into playoffs. They just playing the role of trying to get to a bowl game and beat somebody and ruin their season. This could be tough, man. What worries me is Texas A&M's coming in. I don't know what he's going to do about quarterback, but they played the young kid. Wegman got banged up early, and they played the other kid, and they won, but they weren't throwing the football well. And then all of a sudden, Wegman comes back, and they find balance in their offense, and they kicked somebody's butt a couple of weeks ago, and really a lot of it was offensively, and it was a good opponent. I can't right off the top of my head remember who it was. Yesterday, or excuse me, Saturday, they had problems, and they bring in the young kid again. All of a sudden, he starts peeling off 20 and 30 and 40-yard runs, and really brought them back to the game. And South Carolina is really dangerous on defense. They got a great front. They can create havoc. They can stop a running game, and they can really get to a passer. So I just going to test Texas A&M. The one thing I will say, A&M's defense has been really causing big-time turnovers and big plays and all that. And South Carolina's Achilles heel is a real talented kid, but a very inexperienced quarterback. I think A&M will get out of there with a win, based on probably turnover ratio and hopefully, some. I don't say hopefully because I don't know who I'm pulling for. I kind of want Texas A&M to win out because I just think their season's been deserving of that. But obviously, I hate to pull against South Carolina. But I think that's going to be a really good game, and I think Texas A&M better be ready to play. They're going to get beat down there. They got to go to South Carolina. It's a tough place to play.
For sure. And Tennessee and Kentucky.
Yeah, unless Tennessee just gives it away, they'll beat Kentucky 20 to 30 points. There's one more. Oh, you already mentioned Arkansas and Ole Miss.
Yes, Arkansas and Ole Miss. Nathan?
Yeah, when you look, I guess, Ellis, from what you've kind of watched from a national perspective, it's tough to get I just think it's tough to get a read right now on who the best teams in the country are. I think that's probably a good thing because we may go into this playoff with it being pretty wide open. But, Oregon had a really impressive performance against Illinois, but I don't know if anybody would say unequivocally they are the best team in the country. You get Penn State and Ohio State get to go up against one another. This weekend is Penn State the number 3 team in the country?
Penn State's 3, Ohio State's 4.
And are they the third best team? Probably not. So I just think we're headed toward.
That's one team I have not even seen this year one play. That's Penn State. I couldn't tell you. I haven't seen them.
I've watched them some. They're pretty good. I mean,
they're very good.
Well, every time I have seen Ohio State, they've kind of just looked solid. I hadn't seen anything blow off the screen. I don't know. I guess they're really that good, but every one of their really key games have been a touchdown or so, and a fourth quarter game.
I tell you, if Ryan Day loses at Penn State this weekend, you talk about getting hot. It's going to be hot up there too.
Yeah, they really have to lose to Michigan 2 or 3 years in a row, and I don't know when the last time. Within the playoffs 2 years ago.
Yes, because they lost to Georgia.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, it comes down to expectations. I don't think he's won one, has he?
No.
Last time they won one was Urban when they.
Right. That's coordinator.
I mean, what you were talking about before, Ronnie, that place is probably the ultimate expectation relative program and fan base and job in the country. I mean, I think you're right. Like if they only go 10-2 in the regular season, people will get antsy. But his record is probably one of the 4 or 5 best coaches in the country in the last few years. But it's just if you're not going to a Big Ten title game and going to the playoff, then that's what they expect.
Yeah, he's stacked recruiting classes on top of recruiting classes. and then gone out and plucked whatever he wanted out of the portal. And they must have a big time NIL fund, but they just can't quite get that biggest game when they need it. So I think you're right. I mean, I wouldn't put it past them to make a change if they fall short again.
We got Oregon at Michigan.
I just can't imagine that being a problem. I think Oregon, they started slowly this year, but right now they're playing really good and may not be as good as everybody thinks they are, but they think they're good. And boy, they're playing well and playing with confidence. And I just hadn't seen anything about Michigan other than a strong running game. I hadn't seen anything from Michigan that tells me they can beat a quality team.
Yeah, I tell you, you talk about a job that's changed, and you've seen more than I have. But I remember when I was a kid in Oregon. I mean, if they got to a bowl game, it was a good year.
Yeah.
And now it's, I mean, they expect to be competing every year, and they do.
They had a great player. I'm older than you guys, but there was a quarterback named Terry Brennan, I think, and they went to a Rose Bowl and won it. Hell, that's all I never knew who Oregon was other than that. And then the shoe man, he started pumping that money up there in the 70s and 80s, and it's just a whole different place.
It's a really unique place. When Mike Bellotti was out there and Chip Kelly offered me a job, so I went out there and kind of toured the facility and all that stuff. And one thing that was really neat is, Nike, before they release anything to anybody else, Oregon's kind of the testing ground. So 2 years,
Yeah.
2 years before anybody, I mean, they've got the new gloves and the cleats and the uniforms and all these things. So it's definitely a recruiting tool. I mean, kids love it.
Yeah. If you find a kid that doesn't mind traveling, I don't know how they lose them. I mean, because they got all the gimmicks and the things that kids like. And I would have to say I've never been out there, but you can imagine I hadn't really missed it. But if Oregon or Washington recruited me, I'd probably start asking somebody else for a scholarship.
You'd be
But
UCLA.
kids love that stuff, man. I mean, they want 15 different uniforms. They want to be able to wear something different every game, and all the gloves and the shoes and the workout stuff and everything. Man, it's huge in recruiting. It's really big. So money fixes a lot of things. But like we were just saying, when you've put money into it, like Ohio State has, and Texas A&M and Texas, you don't have any championships to show for it. People get tired of it. They want to know where the beef is.
What do you make, Ellis, of your guy Rhett Lashley? I know y'all were at Auburn together. I mean, he's done a phenomenal job at SMU, and boy, they beat Duke with 6 turnovers on Saturday, so they're finding ways to win football games, and they've got a big ranked versus ranked game against Pitt this weekend.
I didn't know they had that turnover ratio, but I saw them early twice. And one game they won, the other game they lost to BYU. Of course, nobody knew BYU was going to be as good as they are. They were picked about the middle of the conference or worse. And they've done a great job. And they're right there sitting there, a chance to win the thing with Iowa State and can't remember the other school. It was right up there in the Big 12, Kansas State. So they're going to be right in the thick of it, but they lost that game. But both games, my point was, they were playing very disciplined football and executing well and so forth. And one of our Achilles at Auburn and with Gus's system is we didn't have a good third and long package. Offensively, we weren't good at protections and we weren't good at pocket passing because it took so much time to develop the timing. It's almost like running a wishbone offense. The motions and the jet sweeps and a lot of the other things that they were doing, it requires repetition on those plays to do them right. And so you look up and you're putting 35 minutes in that and 10 minutes in the drop back game. And that's not enough to be good at protections and understanding them and everything. A lot of pressure on those running backs if they're involved in the protection to be good at it, because technique wise, nor rules, nor execution, nor repetition, they weren't getting it. And that's where people have always tried to take advantage of it. You give up 250 yards rushing, but you try to get at least 5 negative yardage plays and get them behind the sticks, and then you get your plays that can turn the game. Rhett has been a little bit different. They have a decent drop back game, and they're protecting the kid pretty good. And the quarterback's a really good athlete. I don't know if he's a young kid, but he's a really good athlete and a good player. And he's not making a lot of mistakes with the football either. So it doesn't surprise me that he's got a disciplined, well executing football team. I don't know if their talent level is good enough to take it very far, but it's not going to shock me at all. I've been watching them since about the third or fourth week. I've been telling people, don't be shocked if Clemson has to play SMU in that last game. And the reason I say Clemson is I thought they were going to, be able to get there with the weaker schedule. Now all of a sudden they got the three hottest teams in the conference right now on their schedule. Well, Louisville's kind of fallen off a little bit, but they're tough. Virginia Tech's playing really well. They got to go to their place. Pitt is undefeated still. They got to go to Pitt. So they're going to play some tougher football teams than they've been playing, but they should get there. And if they do, they got a good shot playing SMU. I just think they're playing that well.
Yeah, I think Rhett's done a great job, and I also think you make a good point that he's made a point to learn the passing game, and they can throw it around a little bit, which is something that if you look at UCF, I mean, there's still some struggles going on down there.
Yeah, you have to put time in it. I mean, everybody. I've been around all these wishbone triple option teams when I was coaching in the Southern Conference, and a lot of our people wanted to run three back options. And I just told them, I don't like that because the game can be over in the second quarter. You get 14-20 behind. But trying to be good at throwing the football when you spend 80% of your time in practice on running the football, it's just common sense. It's not going to work. So I think he's evidently tweaked it, the system. I see a lot of those same plays that they used to run. I don't see as much of the jet sweeps and the time up plays. I don't see quite as much of that. I see a little bit more zone and they still run the counter trap and all that, but run it with different formations as opposed to different motions and things. And those things take time out of a practice. And I think he's spending a lot more time on the drop back game. And it's key to being able to play good third down football.
Well, Ellis, I think I think this is the game for Auburn where we can kind of close out here if y'all want. I think this sort of goes to show that you never, you can go in the preseason and you can circle games and you can say, well, this will be a really big game for our schedule, blah blah blah. You don't really know until it works out and how the season starts to play out. Nobody knew Vanderbilt was going to do what they've done, and nobody knew Auburn was going to be in position, kind of desperate for a bowl game. This has ended up being, I don't know if it's going to be their biggest game of the year. This is a really, really big game because, as Ronnie mentioned before, like if you win this and you beat ULM, which you should, all of a sudden you're playing potentially a top 10 Texas A&M team on your home field to go to a bowl game, and that is going to create a really good environment. And it's going to be a really good game in November. And so, you already mentioned that I guess Auburn, has an advantage in this game. Just I guess how do you, what are a couple matchups you're going to be paying attention to for Auburn and Vanderbilt? Again, particularly to slow down a guy like Pavia, who he's number 3 in the league in QBR. He's just been so dynamic all season.
Yep, I think if they can do similar to what they just did, if they could run the football as effectively as they did against a defense that is not, in my opinion, might be statistically, but Kentucky's defense was very solid most of the year. I don't know what the problem is now. They got some kids banged up or something, but you don't run the football for the number of yards they put on Kentucky. You don't do that to a Mark Stoops football team unless you got a hell of a running game. If they can do that again, it kills everything the way Vandy wants to try to win. I can't remember. They had something like when they beat Alabama, the possession time was like 40 minutes or something like that. I mean, just crazy. And that's how they've been winning. So if they run the football real effectively against Vanderbilt, it really takes away their ability to control the game the way they want to control it. And I think DJ, they'll get them stopped enough times to get the ball back. But if it's 2 minute possession, 3 minute possession, 2 minute possession, 3 minute possession, 3 minute possession, 2 minute possession, you playing Vandy's game. You got to have some extended drive, and you got to run the football. You got to stay on the field. And then when you get a little bit ahead, you can try to be a little more aggressive on them. But that's the biggest key, I think. So they've shown the formula just last week. And if they can do that again, Peyton Thorne didn't throw a pick, did
He did very early in the game. Came back and
That's right. He threw one real early, and but it banged. I thought it tipped off of it good, so he didn't really throw them one. But he didn't have to. And his throwing percentage, I don't think he even threw the ball, but I don't remember how many times he throw it.
he
26?
he ended the game completing 20
Yeah,
of his last
20 out of
25
26. Yeah, he threw for 170 yards. They didn't need him, and that's the key against Vandy. And again, I think Vandy is not as good on defense as Kentucky, but Kentucky hasn't been playing that well.
Well, as usual, thanks so much for joining us this week. Enjoyed the conversation, and we'll be back next week for another bye week show, and we'll see if Auburn able to do it again and get a second straight SEC win.
Sounds great.
All right, see y'all.
See ya.